Top Democrats are urging Congress and President Biden to sign executive orders into law for stimulus checks. Now, by taking executive action, millions of people are going to receive additional crisis relief. And 3 Democratic senators want President Biden to go as big as possible with student loan relief, and that means urging him to wait on canceling student loan debt. 3 Democratic senators want President Biden to go as big as possible with student loan relief, and that means urging him to cancel student debt. Politico reported that Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, and Raphael Warnock are requesting President Biden hold off on implementing any loan forgiveness via executive action until they can arrange a meeting with him. According to sources familiar with the matter, the 3 lawmakers want one last chance to push President Biden to go as big as possible, following the president's comments that he is not considering $50,000 in debt collection and debt cancellation for federal borrowers. Warnock's spokesperson told reporters President Biden told Senator Warnock months ago he wanted to meet about this issue, and Senator Warnock wants to make sure that the president hears why people in Georgia want strong debt relief before the White House takes any action. Folks, I definitely agree with President Biden, the Democrats, and even the Republicans for in their push for stimulus checks. Schumer and Warnock have consistently pushed for $50,000 in relief, and they have long argued that canceling student debt is something that President Biden can and should do, using his executive authority. But Biden himself has not been quite so sure. While he pledged to approve $10,000 in forgiveness on the campaign trail, he expressed hesitancy with his authority to wipe out larger amounts of student debt early into his term. But as Warren and her colleagues have maintained, the more relief the better. According to data obtained by Warren's office and recently provided to Insider, while canceling $10,000 in student debt would zero out balances for third borrowers, $50,000 in cancellation would wipe out debt for 72% of borrowers, or 30 million Americans. Warren said in a statement, the more President Biden cancels, the more we narrow the wealth gap among borrowers, and the bigger the boost to Americans' economic futures. This is the right thing to do. Gavin Newsom has just unveiled his latest record-spending proposal for the coming fiscal year. Riding a superheating economy and drawing disproportionately from the state's highest earners, the state is now projected to have a surplus bigger than California or any state has ever had, and significantly more than $76 billion that the governor had predicted in January. Roughly half of the surplus is required by law to be spent on education. That leaves only roughly $49 billion in discretionary money, but Governor Newsom wants to reserve 99% of that for one-time spending. That is $18.1 billion to provide relief for Californians buffeted by inflation, plus $37 billion for infrastructure investments. This is also including $5.6 billion for education facility upgrades, and an extra $2.3 billion for the ongoing fight against the crisis. Now the ball is in the state's legislature court, as lawmakers decide where they agree with the governor and which priorities they want to haggle over before June 15th deadline to pass the final budget for the fiscal year that starts July 1st. For the governor and Democratic leadership in the Assembly and Senate, having to gather billions of dollars during an election year is a good problem to have. The governor still wants to send $400 to most of the state's car owners. That's been the governor's idea to help drivers bear the cost of historically elevated gas prices in the face of pushback from environmentalists. Folks, I personally believe that President Biden should definitely do more for the American people and send out stimulus checks sooner than later. If you guys agree, tell me in the comments.
Constantly hear the critique of Medicare for All that it would take away people's private health insurance. As you said, people are losing private health insurance all the time because they got fired, they got laid off, they turned 65 and gained access to Medicare. So it doesn't make sense. Furthermore, that sort of churn, as we call it, the constant shifting in and out of medical plans, healthcare plans, has really adverse consequences for patient care. You could imagine if you have complex medical needs, having to see a number of doctors, having to go to particular hospitals. All of a sudden, your healthcare plan changed. Now you need to see all new professionals. Assuming you still have a new plan, you may be entirely uninsured and unable to see anyone at all. So it doesn't make sense, no.
Let me go to Ms. Castillo. If we had already adopted Medicare for All before the pandemic, how would things have been different for frontline nurses and their patients? Would our hospitals have been better prepared to protect patients and employees?
You know, and actually this just to relate to the previous questions, imagine, all those folks that lost their jobs in the midst of a deadly pandemic. So if we had Medicare for all before this pandemic started, hospitals would have been better prepared to respond. There would have been a system in place. For years, hospital corporations have used and relied on this just-in-time staffing and for supplies. And in most of the countries, hospitals didn't even hire enough nurses for regular patient care day to day, and that's pre-pandemic. They didn't have enough supplies for a public health emergency. Through the global budgeting payment mechanism that's in your bill, Senator, hospitals would be required to have the minimum nurse staffing levels, and they would be required to have a 1-year supply of the critical PPE and all the other medical supplies that were needed. So our pandemic response would have been much safer for patients and for healthcare workers if we had a Medicare for all system.
Thank you. Dr. El-Sayed, my conservative friends are supposed to worry about how much money we spend, right? That's what being a conservative is about. And I share some of that, I like to spend money. I was kind of a cheapskate mayor and try to continue to do that. So I just don't understand why my Republican friends are not jumping up and down and saying, Bernie, we're with you.
Most taxpayers should not be surprised or necessarily worried if they received an IRS adjustment letter. Now, this letter usually concerns itself with detailing incorrect information entered on your filing. This information can be contested in dispute if you feel like an error has been made. And Yahoo News has said that if your letter requires a response or other action, take care of it as soon as possible. If you owe money to the IRS, you want to deal with it right away. Now, here's some big news from Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is among the popular senators in the country after seeing his favorability skyrocket back home over the past year. Now, reports say that Manchin has faced backlash from progressives nationally. About 57% of West Virginia voters viewed him favorably in results. Now, his popularity jumped 17 points, which is more than any other senator compared to the same period last year. Manchin has frequently staked out his positions that found him at odds with the White House and progressive leaders. But I believe that President Biden, Democrats, Republicans, and Joe Manchin can do something for the American people.
Administration came into place. Of course, we're sitting on the largest untapped oil reserve in the world, amazing enough here in the United States. We've been utilizing this properly. Instead of launching on an assault on domestic energy production, our union would be in a much better state. Of course, as we know, on the first day in office, President Biden shut down the Keystone Pipeline on and off over the years, suspended pending oil and gas leases, and halted domestic energy production.